Now, so people understand very much about these type of subjects, but whatever the invention might have been in this area, oh yeah, if you have many of these pixels that work with color, it must do good. Not necessarily. Maybe the image processing people are better at handling these pixels, but maybe the physicists are better at understanding the spectral contents of each of those pixels. And then there's a notion that if the end user or the consumer of that image is a human being, then there's a sort of a cognitive psychologist that help us understand how we interpret those images. Okay, that interpretation really gives the notion of a red or a warm color versus a cold color like blue, so on and so forth. And really, when we talk about color imaging, you really have to be in this intersection where every one of those areas are somehow integrated together. And that's the area that I really truly believe is color imaging. And so when people talk about color imaging, they typically have a home base, and then they try to extend as far as they can. But there's very truly remarkable things that can happen when you actually discover that sweet spot in between. So let me just start with an example, and I think it really illustrates what happens. So this is what's inside your LCD display. When you put a magnifying glass up against an LCD device, you can actually see the color is actually being rendered by little red and green and blue emitting some sort of light sources, or by filtering those lights through. And this is literally what it looks like when you zoom your image up. And you notice this is one of the buildings out in our campus. And here is my design of an LCD display. Which one do you like? Who says it's the one on the right? Raise your hand. Who says it's one on the left? Raise your hand. Do you like the one on the left? No? Well, so you see how much more the details are lost by sort of some artificial colors that emerge, and they kind of obscure the spatial details that happen here versus these guys. Now, what's the difference? Well, actually, I have same number of pixels, or same number of light emitting elements, or what we call pixels or subpixels. And the difference is really, the only difference really is the way that I arrange the colors. So there's really nothing different about the electronics except for where I place those filters. They're strategically placed. And when you go back and look at these, the amount of spatial information that's here compared to here, this is greater, but yet there's same number of pixels. You might also notice that this is a brighter image than this, and this is great for modern electronics when we're really trying to save energy, because I had so much more spatial resolution to work with that I could actually even squeeze in white pixels that don't filter any of the light, so it lets you see brighter images. So it takes less energy to show you the same brightness of image. So how does this work? And this is where I think it's kind of a fascinating area that marries all these three different fields together. So I'd like to actually go back to a different technology that I call AM radio. And of course, that's the oldest signal processing device known to the signal processing mankind. Now, what happens when you're sitting in the car and listen to AM radio? Maybe you don't listen to AM radio these days, but what do? We tune your channel, right? Well, what that tuning actually does is the following. First of all, the antenna grabs the radio wave from the air, and you don't really I don't really need you to know why these work, but I just want you to know that once you grab this radio wave, what you do is you multiply by sine wave, right? These oscillating things, and then you put it through a filter. That's what requires you to listen to music in your car. Now, when you tune this radio, what you're doing is actually changing this sine wave. But that's the process that you take from grabbing the radio wave and picking your channel, filtering it, and that's how you listen to music. Now, the reason why I tell you this is that actually, the reason why this display device worked is that I discovered that there's a sort of a relationship between the two. In fact, what you see here is exactly the same sort of the principle that made AM radio work. So in the back of the LCD panel, you have this controller that lets more light in or less light in, depending on whether you want that pixel to be bright or not. And you filter that through some predefined color filters, and then you see that with your eye. Now, here's sort of the fascinating thing. mathematically speaking, which I'm not going to require you to understand, but you just have to take it and believe it, that signal that's transmitted by the LCD panel behind the color filters is very similar to this radio wave. And the way that these spatially, the locations of these pixels are defined, it's actually trying to pick a channel. Okay, it's very similar to the way that the radios work. Now, I still need a filter, though, right? I have to create this filter in order for this AM radio to work. And so I have to actually borrow that from your eye. Your eye actually filters the images in a certain way. So I actually need to characterize the property of your eye, how you process that information, how you filter that information out, and selectively decide how I want to tune this based on your photoreceptor, how we interpret those images. So you see this, the cognitive psychology, the signal processing, and we'll get to the physics side of it another time. But so with that sort of tool, or to understand this, I like to kind of go back to this display and explain to you why this display didn't have these crappy color artifacts. Well, so I just kind of made this analogy to the radio stations. So if you have orderly traffic of radio channels, right? Then you have a rock channel and a jazz channel and a classical channel and talk radio show, right? Of course, I'm a trained jazz musician, so of course you want to listen to jazz music. That's why I have it here. And if everybody is behaving the way they're supposed to, this jazz station would just simply fit in there its own spot. Okay. Now, what happened with these displays? It's analogous to the fact that this radio station here decided to sit away from its center of sort of a sweet spot and actually start to occupy the same space that other channels are. So what you're seeing here, these sort of strange colors that appear, is really your radio is trying to tune in on a radio station, but these signals are overlapping with each other. Okay? So really the way that makes this radio sort of traffic system better than this is that I had to characterize how much information there is in each color channel, or each some representation of a color that's similar to radio stations, and I made sure that none of those overlap, and I divided these radio channels so that they are very far from each other, that they don't overlap with each other. Anyway, so this technology and this way of understanding color images can actually generalize to a lot of other color imaging devices. So here's how I explain the radio channel as defined by colors, right? Now, that idea can also be used in projectors. And I think these projectors, we have an expensive projector in this room, but in some of the classrooms in here and some of the places that you see it in offices, we have less expensive projectors. And what they do, in order to display color, just like these guys, where you have to kind of share the space with different colors, what the cheaper version of the projectors do is they have the light source that gets filtered with these sort of something that controls the pixel intensities, and you project that to the screen. But in order to produce color, there's a color wheel that runs around. Okay, it spins around, when it's on red, it produces this red image, and when it's on green, it produces a flash of green, flash of red, blue, sometimes a white image, and it just goes red, blue, green, red, blue, green, red, blue, green, very, very fast, so that it's so fast that maybe you don't see the flashing. But at the same time, it's actually being displayed one color at a time. And so again, your human eye is that filter that allows this radio station to be tuned in and out. Now, so you can always test to see whether you have a good projector or not, or the expensive ones or not, by waving your hand. And you can see that if it's one of those color wheel ones, and you can actually detect those strange artifacts. And you probably notice that if you see an action movie or something on these cheap devices, you start seeing these strange rainbow artifacts. And if you watch an action movie on one of these projectors, you'll see these type of artifacts. So again, I retuned the radios. I manipulated the order in which these red, blue, greens appear, and you can actually get rid of those. Okay? So again, if you have, and these are same refresh rate, so same rate of flashing back and forth, but yet somehow this one eliminates the error that the conventional hardware does. Now again, these devices, these type of analysis apply everywhere. Digital cameras have sort of the opposite pipeline. So in an LCD display, the light is emitted first in the pixel formation, and it is filtered by these colors, and it's observed. On the camera side, you have the other way. So the light goes through the filter first, and it goes to the pixel sensors, and it's processed. Now, in that processing, what happens is that this is encoding the radio stations, if you will. And again, if you avoid a collision, then you make sure that there's no funny artifacts that occur. And so given the conventional cameras, this is what might come out of a camera. And given a sort of alternative patterns, you see some of these artifacts go away. If you see some of the small details, it's a little hard to see with this projector, but you'll see these sort of big pixelization that happens. None of these lines are really straight. On the bricks, you'll see that here. And we're generalizing this idea. I'm actually working with Andrew Sarangan on this to do something called spectral imaging that allows me to observe something beyond color, just to the actual spectral content. And these allow you to see features that your eye cannot see. But in that detail, if you can see it in that detail, you can detect things like, you can use it for things like detecting mad cow disease on a meat, or you can detect marijuana patches if you fly over a state park with these cameras pointing down. You can distinguish different greens to do that. So these kind of devices can be generalized to sort of non-consumer products. You can even use it for polarizers that again detects man-made objects. These are the type of patterns that Andrew does in his lab. But just these pixels have these little micro polarizers. Every pixel gets a different polarization, and if you try to infer the polarization of that scene, this is what you get. But just by reordering the way that these polarizers are ordered, again, I made sure that the radio stations don't collide, and this is what happens. You get much cleaner image. Now, so moving on to a sort of a different subject, but still related to color. Have you ever taken images like this? Right? You point a camera outside towards the window, and this is what you get, right? So the outside, you can see stuff, but inside it's all blackened out. If you integrate the camera longer, if you open the shutter a little longer, you can start seeing the details on the inside, but the outside saturate. And if you leave the camera on for, longer, you can really see the details on the inside, but really the outside is washed out, right? So there's a technique called high dynamic range imaging that really tries to balance the inside and outside images by combining these three images into one. Now, when you do that, you can see that the outside and the inside details are somehow preserved, but what's going on there, right? I had to take three images, right? One with a longer exposure, one with a shorter exposure, and maybe one in the middle. And this is in that hangar cafe over there, and you see that baristas are moving, they're working, right? And then so when you combine them together, somehow they don't line up. Now you can do some sophisticated image processing to try to remove that, but really, you start creating these artifacts that aren't really present in the scene. So how can I do this in a single shot, or how can I do this for a movie, right? If I wanted to shoot a movie scene here, I can't wait for the actors to just stand there. So I got 3 minutes. Oh, whoa. Okay, so I got 3 minutes here. So here's what I did. So a conventional camera, again, filters these red, blue, and green lights. And what I did was I put well, first of all, when we say red, blue, and green filters, really, actually the green filters are really very transparent, and it transmits most of that light. But the red, actually it's a darker filter, and so you don't let as much light through. And so it's darker, and so is the blue. The blue typically cuts out more light. And I can even make that difference even further by putting a special color filter in front that sort of eliminates or really makes the blue intensity small. So by the time it goes through this, the blue is already small, and if it goes through the blue filter inside the camera, it's even smaller. So now you see that I get a lot of green light some modest amount of light in red and very small amount of blue. When I do that, I can treat this as a high exposure, medium exposure, and low exposure, right? So I can try to synthesize this image detail based not on 3 shots, but a single shot that's somehow biased by the colors. And by doing so, I can take a single shot of that same scene with people moving around and such, but get a clear detail inside and outside. And capture moving objects such as this right here. It's a little pendulum standing out there that's actually swinging around. But I can take a single shot of that and outside and the inside, right? Or I can even take a shot of a sunset. So I got 2 minutes to talk to you about one more thing that color imaging does. So, can you be convinced that these are the same colors? Our human brain works in a strange way. They are really equal. I cropped this out literally from these images. Okay. Now, but this looks blue to us. This looks red to us, right? And you can't, even if I showed you this image, you can't turn that off. Your human vision and the sense of color is so strong that you can't do this. Now, what's actually going on in your brain is actually trying to interpret what the lighting is in this scene, and it tries to cancel that out in your brain. And you really can't turn that off. And so what happens is that if you observe a scene with some light, you observe one type of image, and you observe that scene, the same scene with a different light, it actually has a completely different spectral composition, but yet our eyes and brains interpret as the same scene. Camera is a very honest device. It won't let you do that. So what happens is that as camera observes a scene lit by sunlight or by a different light source, it sees different things. It just simply, it's just a whole bunch of light meters. So it just simply tells you, I have a blue car here and an orange car here, right? But if I showed that image back to you, you would say, that's not the scene I took a picture of, right? So a human observer would reject it. So what needs to happen is that we need to actually mimic the process of the brain, right? And the eyes, so that we actually produce that false image back to you, right? So there's a lot of work on this, but here's sort of my spin on this subject. Researchers in psychology found that actually you can do a lot better in this notion of color constancy if 2 eyes were looking at the same object. If we can fool our eyes a little bit, or the notion of color constancy, the color being constant, that goes away a little bit. I'll finish up in one slide. So goes away a little bit if you take the one eye off of that subject. So the question is, can I improve this camera brain mimicking process if I had 2 cameras? And the answer is yes. So then I have the left camera and the right camera. And it turns out if I take the difference of the appearance of that color, it's almost entirely to do with the light source. Okay? So then the brown desk looks brown from every direction. If there's any difference in the appearance, it's due to some way that the light is reflecting on this rather than the object itself. So if I take 2 cameras from looking at a different angle and take the sort of difference of the appearance, there's a lot of information about that light. And then so I can estimate what lit that scene. And based on that, I can compensate for that light, take it away, right? So that's sort of and there's a lot of physics that explains why that is. And we have to interpret that and then provide a sort of the psychologist's view of how we would compensate for that light to render an image like this. In any case, so I'm going to just conclude and say that color image processing is really not just images, not about color, but it's really an intersection of a lot of different things: spatial information, temporal information, color information, angular information, even polarimetric. And you can use it for many different things. Anyway, so I'd like to just acknowledge all the sponsors that have made this type of research possible, as well as the collaborators and the graduate students, some of you that are sitting here. So thank you.